Hi, and welcome to another episode of Oral Wealth, Prosperity in Practice. My name is Jackson Sadler, and I'm joined once again by my co-host, Mr. Brian Swilling.
Welcome, everybody. How you doing?
Yeah, it's good to be here again with you, Brian.
Yeah.
And here on the Oral Wealth Podcast, if you guys are joining us for the first time, we are focused on financial literacy education and removing some of the stigma around discussing different financial aspects that we're not really discussed or taught about during our training throughout dental school, throughout undergraduate. A lot of these things we have to teach ourselves, and they can have varying levels of impact on our personal lives and our careers. So Brian and I are just exploring these different aspects of personal finance and how they relate to our lives as a whole. And one of the things that we're going to be covering today is continuing to delve into dental contract agreements or dental employment agreements, and really just getting down to the nuts and bolts of everything. Today's going to be kind of an overview from about 30,000 feet, reviewing different contract terms and some of the red flags that you may encounter in your contract negotiations.
Yeah. So this is a continuation from the previous episode where we started discussing contracts, but um, there's a lot of meat in there. So this is continuation. So um, if you haven't listened to the previous episode, you might want to go back and listen to that one, or you can start here and go listen to the other one after, and get the full picture.
Or you can listen to all of them.
Just listen to everything
as many times as you want.
Yeah,
totally fine. Well, like I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about understanding contracts in dentistry, just some of the essential knowledge to have before you sign anything. And a lot of this presentation is based on some information that we got from the American Dental Association. So we'll make sure that that information is in the show notes at the end here. But yeah, we're going to get into it.
Yeah, we're excited.
Yeah, so understanding contracts in dentistry, just the essential knowledge before you sign. So the importance of contracts. So why do you have to have a contract? I think honestly, if we're being completely honest with each other, everybody kind of expects to have a contract agreement. I think people generally understand that it's necessary in some regards to protect your own interests. And while people have kind of a cursory understanding of what they are, what they entail, why it's important to their careers, without having a real deep dive into a dental contract or dental employment agreement, we're kind of left at the mercy of our advisors, which we need advisors. Actually, funny enough, that's one of the first things we're going to cover. We need advisors, but we also need to make sure that we are advocates for ourselves and that we are able to recognize when what someone else is suggesting may not necessarily be in line with our vision for our careers and our paths. So
yeah, I mean, think about starting your first job on a handshake.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes that could work out. But if a dentist is old school and wants to do a handshake agreement, I think they would respect the fact that you've requested a contract, at least the terms, agree to the terms.
Yeah. And actually, we'll cover that later on as well. But, contract handshake agreements, while I think well-intentioned, this slide actually illustrates exactly why you need to have one. So they mitigate risk and they provide a framework for addressing disputes and reinforcing commitments that were made. And if you got a handshake agreement, then if nothing was written down, if nothing was recorded anywhere, then it becomes a he said, she said situation. And then you have to navigate how you're going to resolve that dispute. And, a lot of times I think people can navigate that in a congenial way and be able to maintain their relationship. But, we're talking about finances here. So that's a pain point for a lot of people. And it's a point that they don't necessarily budge on easily. So what we also don't want is people making good faith handshake agreements and then things not going the way that they were promised or the way that they expected. And now all of a sudden you have to deal with that in addition to potentially deteriorating relationship and maybe even looking for a new job. So yeah, protecting your interests and avoiding misunderstandings again, it just minimizes any confusion. It makes sure that you understand fully what what the expectations are of you and your position, and also it makes sure that you have a clear outline of what your expectations are of the practice or the organization that you're about to make an agreement with. Um, you know, we again just kind of the good faith thing.
Yeah.
I think most people who get into healthcare are altruistic to some degree,
Yeah.
and you don't necessarily want to, fight with people over these things or be nitpicky about different benefits or how much money you're making. But the unfortunate reality is that you have to advocate for yourself. You're going to be the best advocate for yourself. Nobody's going to look out for you better than you, at least in this situation.
Yeah. And, and that's a great point. It just avoids misunderstandings. I think it's a responsible professional view. Nobody should be upset if you want to convert a handshake agreement into a contract. Like
Right.
I think it shows
I think it's
maturity.
I think that's a red flag.
Yeah.
If you ask for a formal written contract and the person is giving you pushback
Yeah.
on it, then I would ask why. I would wonder why they don't want this in writing.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, for the, and that leads, we've kind of mentioned this already, but like the foundations of a positive working relationship should start there, right? To Jackson's point, if you ask for a contract and there's some pushback, that's a red flag. And that's an immediate sign that the relationship is not a good
Right.
future
It
working relationship.
promotes transparency
Yeah.
and trust. Yeah.
Yeah, and the transparency and trust is a key in any working relationship, even if you're an employee. But as an associate, um, you have a lot of responsibility,
Yeah.
right?
A lot more than you realize.
So they should trust the owning doctor should trust you just as much as you should trust them. And this is the start of it.
Agreed.
It's the roadmap to guide, the next, your start of your career or second career, or, your second job out of, school, whatever it is. But this is the start of effective communication and avoids ambiguity.
All right. So, like I mentioned before, finding advisors is paramount. Like pretty much everything that I have read about contract negotiation, contract review has said get a lawyer. And I'm just going to echo that advice. Get a lawyer. If you're thinking I'll do it myself, you might be fine. If you have a background in law, if you have a background, potentially working in administration with dentistry before you got into practice, then have at it. You may know exactly what you're doing. But for the majority of us, I think that this is just it's a blind spot for us. It's
Yeah.
it's an area where we have some information, we have some knowledge, but a little bit of knowledge can be dangerous. It can get us into trouble. So
Yeah, and
and
the Google monster can get you.
oh,
Like
for
you can go
sure,
down a rabbit hole real
for
quick
sure.
trying to be a Google lawyer.
And I think a lot of us also, being money conscious, we don't necessarily want to come out of pocket for however many hundreds of or potentially thousands. It shouldn't be like multiple thousands. I wouldn't expect it, at least from what I've seen working with some
Yeah.
lawyers. But having them review a contract and make recommendations, that money up front, it's going to be well worth it, because that may earn you thousands of dollars. And in subtle ways too, things like arguing for how much continuing education money you get, arguing for how your paid time off accrues, and if it rolls over, how long or how long you have to give people like notice ahead of time to take off and stuff like that. They can all affect your life. And a lawyer who's conscious of these things might save you from some headaches.
Yeah, and this point is define your need. Um, there are a lot of dental specific or attorneys that understand the dental world, dental medical, um, that can avoid a lot of. Usually, those are flat fee arrangements because they're so familiar with the dental agreements. So you can, if you find somebody who's dental specific, it just makes it more efficient. Sometimes it's lower cost. If you get an attorney that is not as familiar, it might be a lot of back and forth and additional cost.
Sure.
So they also got to understand state specific regulations that are important to, tailoring the contract. So it's, the attorney is a definite. And if you are in the middle of contract negotiation and you don't know who to reach out to, Jackson and I have a bunch of resources. So feel free to reach out.
Like this.
Yep.
Your state and local dental societies. So I just put the North Carolina Dental Society on here. I'm a member of the North Carolina Dental Society. I try to stay active, an active participant. But a lot of different dental societies, your state, county, local societies will have resources for these things because people have been dealing with these issues for years. It's just, again, not necessarily something that people talk about often out in the open, for several different reasons. I think some people are private about their finances, which is understandable. I think some people may have made some mistakes with their contract process and managing their finances, and that's not necessarily a thing that people want to be forthcoming about. So,
even though we'd like to change that,
exactly, that's exactly why we're here.
Yeah.
But structured places like this, or speaking to colleagues who, again, if you got someone who's close to you who's been through this process, just touching base with them so that they can give you their insight. And again, sometimes it's the make sure you don't do this, make sure you don't let this thing happen, that someone has learned from experience that ends up being invaluable for you and saves you a lot of money, a lot of headache.
Yeah, and this goes back to what we mentioned in past episodes, like colleagues or your mentor. Like, we recommend everybody have that person that can help them guide them through their career. They're not doing it alone. I think that could be a colleague or, a seasoned professional.
Yeah, absolutely. And then if you're still in dental school, oftentimes your dental school's career center will have resources for you. I know when I was in school, I was focused on getting into residency. I wasn't particularly concerned about contracts because I knew whatever contract they put in front of me was just what I was going to have to deal with. But had I been more conscious of it, if I had paid attention to these things, or if someone had presented it to me at the time, I think it would have been really valuable just to get a head start on it for when I eventually was looking at contracts and residency. You can't start looking at these things too early.
Yeah. I mean, have you ever seen somebody negotiate a residency contract?
No.
Yeah.
No.
I'm assuming you can, though.
I bet you can.
Yeah.
I bet you can.
You just never experienced it.
Yeah. To be honest, now that we're talking about it, you probably have some leverage too, because at that point they've already accepted you, and it'll be hard for them to scramble to find someone else. Don't tell anybody I said that, though.
Yeah.
And then, other professionals. So people like Brian, funny enough, Brian recommended someone that I've spoken to who's given me some feedback, which I've found valuable. Even if I had like a relatively clear view of what I was looking for, just being able to talk to somebody who on a regular basis, like you said, is dealing with these things. Exactly. So they understand what the norms are. They understand what the likelihood of you getting what you're asking for is. And we'll cover this later on too. But one of the other principles of dealing with contract negotiations is everything is negotiable. So don't ever feel like you can't ask for something, or that you shouldn't ask for something. I would try to be reasonable with what you're asking for, but also you don't know that they're going to say no until they say no.
Yeah. Yeah. And, as one of these other professionals, since I run a CPA firm and a financial planning firm, all focused on dentists and healthcare professionals. So we are a good resource. And as the quarterback for a lot of our relationships, we want to call it personal CFO or quarterback, we have to have vetted professionals because our knowledge only extends so much. We have to have those professionals. So usually your CPA or your financial advisor or both will have an extensive network of trusted professionals. So it's valuable.
All right, so now we're going to get into some of the contract details. And again, this is a 30,000 feet view. We'll also have an example of a couple of sample contracts just so that you can review them, kind of get comfortable with the structure, and because it can be a little bit overwhelming. We talked about this last time a little bit. I think that some of the legal jargon is it's similar to learning dentalese, right? It's similar to learning all those terms in dentistry. And if you don't work in that sector all the time, then these things can be, a little bit daunting at times.
Yeah.
But your salary and commission structure, this portion of your contract should clearly outline your salary specifics. So that's going to be your payment frequency, commission details, understanding how your commission is going to be calculated. And you can see over here to the left some of the more common terms here that everybody knows what salary is. Commission,
Yeah, or sometimes that could be compensation, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so they don't always use the term commission, but compensation that's not salary falls into this category.
Yeah, yep, agreed. So, and this actually says based on production, but if you look one down, the commission base, it then goes on to specify whether it's going to be based on gross billing. So are you getting paid based on the work that you're doing, the price of the work that you're doing? Collections, the amount of money that your practice is actually able to get from patients for the work that you have done, or net profit. So the collected amount minus whatever your operating expenses are.
Yeah.
So just very important to be aware of if you're responsible for any of these operating expenses, lab bills and things like that. You can see those in the deductions: lab and supply expenses, overhead expenses, staff salary, etc. And you also want to know how they're going to calculate this. So again, it's just one of those things that we're not taught about. We don't necessarily think about. If you don't have it at the top of your mind, like, well, okay, I understand my salary. I understand that they're going to get it from collections. But if you don't know how they're gonna calculate it for you, then what you're getting may be different from what you're expecting to get.
Yeah. Yeah. And most of the contracts we see are a percentage of collections, which makes it a big deal. But if you could get percentage of, production, the gross billing, that is much
Ideal.
different. So, you can, again, that's something you can ask, and it's
Absolutely.
a reasonable request. But the owner usually has something in mind that they're comfortable with. So, what you ask, if they're going to good faith negotiate, they might say, well, if I do that, I might not be able to do this.
Yeah. Because, to be fair, if you're getting paid solely, if you're getting paid based off of production instead of collections, then they're giving you more money than they are potentially giving you more money than they're bringing in for the work that you have done. So that money's got to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
And to your point, you may have to make concessions at other places in the contract. So insurance coverages, just making sure that you understand the different types of insurance benefits. Obviously, healthcare with dental, vision, disability. Is your company going to provide you with a life insurance policy? Is there workers' compensation, or unemployment benefits? So this is kind of one of the annoying things, at least for me in dentistry. It was, you get some people from these insurance companies, disability and life insurance companies, coming to talk to you, and at least for me, I understood it's their job, and what they're doing is important. You need disability insurance, just because you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah. I think disability in residency, even,
Sure.
like as soon as you start practicing and making money, as soon as you have an income, disability insurance for dentists is very important. Life insurance is secondary, I think.
Sure.
Depending on your family situation.
Sure, that's exactly what I was thinking.
But disability, and that's why the insurance companies that sell disability are always hitting up,
dental schools,
because they know they need it, and it's a good business. But again, you got to be aware of why they're pushing and what they're pushing.
Right. And what's necessary in your life insurance and
Yeah.
disability contracts. If there's so much stuff, we could do an entire episode on disability insurance.
Yeah.
But I mean, there are various varying types. I don't know if they necessarily do this one anymore, but one of the things I was told was that I needed to specify that my disability contract is going to have some type of payout if I'm not able to perform my job within its current capacity,
Yeah.
but also not limiting me from working at all.
Yeah.
So, for example, if I were to perfect example, if I were to have an issue with like my vision and I just couldn't see fine detail anymore, and dentistry, it's a profession of working in millimeters. So if I can't see fine detail anymore as a dentist and I can't practice on patients anymore, but I'm still able to teach,
Yeah.
like I can see well enough to teach and have discussions with students. You want to make sure that the probable drop in salary you would have associated with teaching does not disqualify you from collecting your disability benefits
Yeah.
from actually being able to practice. So it's just
That's
minutia like that.
definitely something that still exists and you should request.
Yeah.
But we're kind of talking about contracts. So like it's important to have your individual coverages, but you could, depending on the benefits offered by the practice, which would go into all your benefits, including insurance, would go into total compensation, right? So
Sure.
I think we are going to talk about that, but like you have what you're going to make like salary wise or off productions or collections. Then you got to add the value of the benefits they provide. And the dental healthcare space is still one of the spaces, especially in the smaller private practices, that aren't providing extensive benefits. Like you're lucky to get healthcare. In some places, you're lucky to get group disability or group life. More and more people are doing retirement plans, but you have to value that entire compensation.
Yep.
When you're if you're comparing contracts.
Yep. Agreed. So paid leave policies, you want to know exactly how they're going to calculate your vacation time, how, like I mentioned before, how far ahead you have to give them notice. Can they just tell you no, at certain times of year, like, no, you can't take that time off? Again, that's one of those things that you have to decide for yourself if that's going to be a deal breaker or not. But also you don't want to be blindsided by it. That's the main thing. Just be able to make whatever decision you're comfortable with all of the appropriate knowledge to do so.
And especially if you're a private practice where you're like maybe the only associate, when you are negotiating your contract, you probably should look at the calendar ahead and figure out when the main dentist needs you, to cover, and vice versa. Have that kind of planned out before the contract, so you can kind of know what that leave schedule and when are the days you can't. And sick leave is a hard one with dentistry, right? Like, obviously you don't want to go in sick, but there's patients that they have to cancel and reschedule.
Yeah.
So it's important to discuss how that works.
That's a great point, actually. I hadn't thought about that from the standpoint of like a, single owner practice with an associate or, maybe 2 or 3 docs. Because I think oftentimes people do have kind of yearly schedules where it's like, yeah, we go on vacation around this time every year. And if one of the reasons that they're hiring you is so that they don't have to close their office during that time, you want to know about that ahead of time if you're used to taking vacation at a certain time of year as well.
Yeah. And if it overlaps, that could be a big issue, right?
Yeah.
Like if you have this trip that you always do with the family or whatever, and you love it, and that's the same weekend they take.
Yeah.
Or same week. That should be known up front, because then they have to close the office, and that changes the expectation.
Agreed.
So yeah, I'll go retirement plans, because this is kind of my specialty, and especially on the tax and accounting side, when we start on that side, a lot of times people aren't ready for financial planning because we're their first financial, and because we run those businesses separately, we start on the tax and accounting side, they start making money, and retirement plans is the first thing we set up for those new dentists. And and I think it's an underrated benefit um, for the owner, but also for the associate and the other staff in the dental practice. The younger you are, the less value you put on it.
Mhm.
But from our experience, like the earlier you start, even if it's a small amount, the better off you are. And
Compound interest.
yeah, and if the practice does not have a retirement plan, that should be and you're going into contract negotiation, that should be a consideration, because a lot of times they come with a match, and let's say it's 4%. That's a 4% boost in your pay, and it's not ideal. Like maybe I'd like that 4% in my commission structure, but
Right.
like
Yeah.
otherwise, without it being put in front of you, a lot of people start way later.
Yeah.
Um, so retirement plans are important. They're not as expensive to set up as they used to be. So a lot of dentists still think, oh, I can't do it, it's too expensive. But actually, it's way cheaper than providing healthcare at this point.
Okay. Yeah. I
Yeah.
believe that.
So, and you get a tax benefit as the owner, and usually the greatest tax benefit. So there's a lot of tax credits. If you're a owner, or you're talking about contracts. So if you're associate going in, um, either way, you could probably request it. There's tax credits that the government is providing because they want people to save more outside of, the this of Social Security.
Sure. Of course.
So
For sure.
there's not so much pressure on Social Security.
I still want my Social Security money back. I've been paying it since I was 16.
Yeah, someone was asking me about that. We'll do a whole episode on that, whether it stays around.
I've been throwing money in a hole since I was 16. I've known it since I was like 19.
Yeah, so we'll do an episode on that, but it's important to understand that. And again, the retirement benefit should be included in your overall total compensation analysis.
Agreed. So this I think can be more clear if you're working with a larger group or a DSO. I'll let you speak to if you know anything about how this comes into play for people in small group practices. But you want to know if they're looking at any specific metrics for you, what their expectations are for you, specifically in terms of production or how many patients you're going to be seeing. Could even be things like what's the quality of your reviews, your patient reviews online. So those things, while they may not be fully in your control, they can definitely affect your the terms of your contract if you're looking at um, renegotiating in the future and trying to make sure that you have leverage to get what's going to be in your best interest, because that's what we're talking about here, just with negotiations, is the entity that you're negotiating with is always going to be working in their own best interest. You should assume that they're going to be working in their own best interest, and you need to do the same for yourself. Doesn't necessarily need to be contentious, but I wouldn't assume that the other party is going to do things out of altruism or just because they feel that it's the right thing to do. If a lot of times people feel it's your responsibility to know these things, and if you don't, then better luck next time.
Yeah, when you signed your contract, Jackson, since you're working a bigger practice that has kind of a better structure or a more professional structure, did you know like performance metrics and how often you're going to be have reviews when you signed your contract?
Yeah, to be honest, if I remember correctly, we didn't have any like performance reviews type things or metrics that needed to be met outside of for my uh for my salary. So if have a base salary, and then there is a true up based on percentage of collections beyond a threshold.
Yeah.
So they're going to pay me that base salary, but let's say if in the first quarter and the second quarter we brought in enough revenue for me to get more money because I've met that threshold for those quarters, but then on the back end, the second two quarters we didn't meet that threshold, then I might be liable for giving them some of that money back.
Oh, really?
If exactly,
Okay.
if it doesn't work out throughout the entire year that I meet the threshold over the 4 quarters, then I may have to give some of what they give me earlier on in the year back.
Oh yeah, that was probably a big point. Were you like really comfortable with how that worked when you signed up?
Um, Not super comfortable with it. I think the mindset I had was that if I just make my base salary, then that's enough for me to live off of. And most of the people that worked for the practice or that I knew told me that the threshold was not anything that should be difficult to meet.
Okay.
So, working the number of days that I'm contracted to work, I think the only time I haven't met that threshold has been maybe the first quarter that I worked there.
Yeah.
So it's worked out okay, but again, this is all about just being aware of what's in your contract and deciding if you're comfortable with it or not.
Yeah.
So that was the thing
Yeah.
that at the time I was comfortable
Yeah,
with.
and I think with what I see with smaller practices is this is really not talked about. Like I think dentists still aren't comfortable with like operating it really like a business, right?
Dentists in general. There are
Yes,
some of you out
sorry.
there who are very smart and know exactly what you're doing.
Yeah. I see a lot of um people implementing like EOS, the entrepreneur operating system,
Mhm.
which is a very structured way to do reviews, track key performance indicators or what they call KPIs. And I think this is actually something until we started researching this, I hadn't really thought about talking about in the contract negotiation stage. But I think it's important on understanding like how often you're going to review. Is there a 90 day period where it's a um, testing period,
Mhm.
and then after that 90 days, you decide whether they continue the contract or not. Like understanding how that will work, and maybe even asking for like regular reviews, um, I think is probably a good thing to do. Like request that there is a structure around, your performance, and especially if you're early on in your career, it's only going to be helpful. That feedback is
Yep.
helpful. You will know where you stand. You'll know where the owner stands. So it is important, but I don't see it happening in a ton of practices right now. But
Sure.
that's changed. Like that's changing. I think that's changing rapidly now.
That reminded me of something else. I would double check this just to obviously state specific, but I saw something about like a opportunity to cure clause or something like that, where basically if you do have your performance reviews and you're not meeting metrics, where you have something in there that kind of guarantees you the opportunity to try to remedy those
Oh yeah,
things versus being impacted detrimentally or even terminated.
yeah, yeah. I mean that's important. Um, next, continuing education. Um, I think a lot of practices have continuing education support, um, but I think you can discuss the amount of that,
For sure.
right? They should A good owner should want you to continue improving your skill set and should benefit that. So that's definitely something you should like whether it's a dollar stipend or maybe if it's even a CE provided by the practice itself or a group trip.
Mm-hmm.
Um, all these things should be considered.
And another thing at the very bottom of this here, so maintaining your licensure, it paying for your licensure and your professional organization dues, um, that's something that I think is very reasonable to ask for in your contract. And also it ends up being incredibly beneficial because this stuff is expensive. Dues for I want to say dues for the National Oral Surgery Organization this year, somewhere around $1,000. But then which is okay, it's not excessive or anything. But then you start thinking about that in relation to the American Dental Association dues, North Carolina Dental Society dues, or whatever your state organization um, dues are. Your county societies, and I'm actively involved in all of these, for my specialty specifically, and then for dentistry as a whole. So the number can add up. It's not an incredible amount of money, but if I'm estimating, we say around $4,000 to $5,000. That's $4,000 to $5,000 you're spending just to become, maintain your membership in these organizations. Um, it's not going to break the bank, but it probably will be an annoyance
Yeah.
if you're coming out of pocket for it every time, every year. This is a recurring
Yeah.
thing year after year after year.
And you got to decide, I mean, I think everybody should support their local dental society, because there's a lot of value there. I know people they're getting CE from a million places now, but that local presence is important. But sometimes you got to decide where you're getting the value and maybe trim it a little bit. But we are kind of running a little bit behind, so we're going to run through these.
We're getting to the end here.
Yeah.
So we talked about this a little bit. So Brian talked about different ways that you compensated beyond just your salary. So just important understanding the different aspects of that, whether or not you're going to get any bonuses, how those bonuses are distributed, whether you're liable for returning any of the money for those bonuses if you decide to leave the practice earlier, or if you don't meet any of those metrics that we were talking about.
Yeah, the true up.
Yep, exactly. So just very important to understand all the aspects of that, which again, you should have advisors guiding you through.
Yeah, and again, add a economic value for the benefits that that are provided also there.
Yep.
So next, restrictive covenants. These are really important parts of the legal language. It can really dictate, the future employment. Limit your geography, time frames after leaving a practice, right? You could have a multi-year, non-solicit, non-compete.
Right, yeah.
So this is usually where that non-compete clause, is in this restrictive covenant section. It's early. We haven't had enough coffee. So it's crucial to review these causes with your attorney and really understand what the impact is going to be on those. Because that's where I see the most complaints, right? Especially as an associate that maybe is loving their job, but is at a point where they really want to go and kind of run things their own way. They might not have any issues with the way the current, owner is doing it, but there's little things they would like to do different.
Sure.
Maybe even major things, but then they want to go and do a startup or buy a practice. And this can be be a big hindrance to the next step of your career. So make sure you understand these.
Absolutely. But we talked about this a little bit earlier as well. So if you do find yourself with somebody that, maybe you worked in, or maybe you grew up in a town and you knew a dentist most of your life and you've always thought you want to go work in that practice, and you don't necessarily feel like you need a written formal contract because of the pre-existing relationship you have with this person. And like we were saying before, fair enough, this is your decision, your career. We just want to make sure that you protect yourself as much as possible and that you avoid as many pitfalls as you can. So if you're going to do a handshake agreement, if the person that you're making this agreement with doesn't like the formalities, doesn't want something written, what the American Dental Association recommends is trying to document all of these terms as best you can based on your discussions, so that it's written down somewhere and can be referenced later on. You can send it to an attorney for review just on your own side. The other person doesn't have to be involved or know about it. And then if you send them an email with the information in it, and if they open that email, then you've done as much as you can, I think, to protect yourself in that regard, because they can't claim that what you sent them was inaccurate. And if they ignore it, then it's kind of like, well, I presented it to you as I understood it and you did not correct it, and we just moved forward with things. So
yeah. I mean, you can another way to look at that is you could request a term sheet, right? Whether you don't want to sign a real document, can you sign just a summary of the terms?
Yeah.
Right. You could just say, I acknowledge this is right. But the email is very important, just so you understand really what's going on. And you could present it as that. Here's how I understand the the handshake agreement. I'm very excited about it. Here's what I understand.
Yeah, makes sense. And we're getting to the end here, but making sure you understand, whether you're, and I think most people will, but by the time they sign a contract, but whether or not you're going to be an employee or if you're going to be an independent contractor. And, there are varying implications of each. Each have their own benefits to them. We can see here, this is from a ADA contract agreement review document that we'll have in the show notes as well. But you can see, to the patient, they don't know any difference, but for you, it's going to have a lot of different implications. So again, just really driving the point home of making sure that you understand the difference between the two. You understand your responsibilities for each, more so for the independent contractor, but making sure you understand your personal responsibilities, your tax responsibilities, making sure that you understand that you're responsible for your benefits at that point as well. Which are all available to you as an independent contractor, and there are some good tax benefits to doing it that way.
Yeah, there's solo 401ks. There's solo benefits across the board. But the big thing I want to highlight is, especially if you have a very productive career or year as a 1099 contractor, you're responsible for all those taxes, and I see it over and over again where nobody is saving for those taxes.
Right. They just spend the money.
Right. So let's say you make $300,000, you're probably in the, paying 25 to 30% in taxes on that. That's a big chunk of change.
At least.
Yeah, at least
25 to 30%. Man, I wish I could get that.
Federal plus state, and so you don't want to be caught with, let's say, 90,000 to 100,000 plus tax bill, using that example. Like, if you spend all that money, it's not going to be good.
Yeah. It's going to be stressful.
You're going to have to figure out where to come up with that money.
For sure.
So make sure you bank, a percentage of that salary. Talk to your CPA, tax advisor, and every single month, put aside that money for taxes. You'll be happier.
Yep.
And it's better to be out of sight, out of mind, so you don't spend it.
Yep. Agreed. All right. Well, that's pretty much what we have for you all today. And, I'm sure at some point we'll revisit contracts and we'll do episodes diving deeper into individual aspects of the contracts as well. But this is just something that, as we mentioned before, it's a thing that I'm currently working through. It's always kind of been not necessarily a pain point, but just one of those things that I've known I really needed to pay attention to. I know that it can affect my life moving forward and can affect my overall career satisfaction moving forward. And I like what I do, and I want to continue to do what I'm doing. And I don't want, the business agreement that I have signed allowing me to do what I do in the capacity that I do it to end up being the reason that I'm unhappy with my work.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I see it all the time. And this is what this podcast is about. It's about, what do I see my clients struggling with, what you're struggling with. And then we put it out there, and hopefully an enjoyable and exciting manner. Contracts, this is, very important, but it's dry. But I hope everybody enjoyed the episode. If you have any questions, again, always reach out. All the information we talked about will be in the show notes. Make sure you like and subscribe.
Please do.
And share these episodes with your colleagues. Reach out with any future topics you would like to discuss. And I'm Brian Swilling, and this is the Oral Wealth Prosperity and Practice Podcast with Dr. Jackson Sadler, and we're excited to see you on the next one.